Well, hey there, friends. Hey, welcome to another podcast. Today I've got y'all in the Carriage Crossing Clubhouse. I was able to get this place all alone to myself, so it's certainly a nicer setting for my dusty pickup. So, anyways, I hope to do a few series podcasts here where I talk about for me what topics have been really sensitive for me in regards to my adventures with the criminal court system, going to jail and stuff like that. So, and I've always been, kind of been fearful of wanting to share stuff like this, just for fear of retribution and stuff like that. But I think we live in times where we all kind of have to worry about, it's times are right for where we all have to kind of stand in our truth and, defend truth, fight for freedom, and because the alternative will be, to live our lives in chains and stuff like that. So, the other night, just last night, I had a conversation with my landlord. His name's David, and you guys, he's kind of a cockroach. No, I mean that with all due respect. That's the name of his law firm, cockroach law firm. But yeah, he's an attorney, but yeah, he gave me some advice. Advised me to, get back on these podcasts and start talking about my experiences. And he said it would be a benefit to me, and it'd also be a benefit to young men that maybe have been placed in the same circumstances, to be able to overcome their circumstances and so forth. So, and David, he's an interesting fellow. I've been a number of times. I've wanted to call him a cockroach. Ways that came at me attacking my faith and stuff like that. Since I've lived with him, he won't let me have a moment of peace. No, I love the guy. We become good friends, but y'all, since I've lived in this neighborhood, I've been here a few months, and I got to say this has probably been, certainly a trial of my faith. It felt like since I've been here, I've lost some of my identity and just feelings of being so lonely and stuff like that. And I think and it's not just me, you guys. I know that plagues our culture right now. It's, just people feeling so alone and so forth. So, but yeah, great guy, my landlord. But yeah, since I've had these feelings, I've kind of reflected on DNC 121. This is the doctrine section of Doctrine and Covenants where Joseph Smith is in Liberty Jail along with some of the other LDS leaders, and they are they petitioned government leaders for help and just to do something for them, and of course their petitions were ignored, and so this is him praying to God for that he'd be able to hear their cries and stuff. He says, so how long shall thy hand be stayed, and thine eye, yea, thy pure eye behold from the eternal heavens the wrongs of thy people and of thy servants, and thine ear be penetrated with their cries? Yea, O Lord, how long shall thy suffer these wrongs and unlawful oppressions? Before thine heart shall be softened towards them, and thy bowels be moved with compassion towards them. So, this was a prayer directed towards LDS people, and for those that were locked up in Liberty Jail, that God would have compassion towards them, and relieve them from their oppressors, and then come back to today. Who are oppressors today, and is there anyone that can say that they've any sect or religion or anyone out or a group of people out there that can say that they've cornered the market on being oppressed? A group of God's people that's been the only ones that's been oppressed. And I think we can say that we're all, everyone around the world is being oppressed. And Isaiah 3:5 kind of gives us a different perspective on that. It says, and the people will be oppressed, each one by another, and each one by his neighbor. So yeah, in Isaiah 3:5 it says that we'll all be oppressed, even by our own neighbors. and we'll oppress them. So to play this, woe is me and victim card, oftentimes is to no avail. We have to recognize, I think, the struggles of our neighbors and help them as well. So as opposed to just thinking that we're the only ones that's oppressed. So let's see, where was I? And then, and then another point I wanted to make, in DNC 121, it says, mentions unlawful oppressions. Suffer these wrongs and unlawful oppressions. And today, I think you could call them lawful oppressions, just provisions in legislation and in laws that, create provision for people to oppress others. So you could say they're lawful oppressions. So and that's what I hope to be able to talk about today, is how we can how these unfair laws can be contested, how they can be challenged and stuff like that. So there could be criminal reform, and Thomas Jefferson showed us the way to do that. He envisioned, what was it he said? He says, so I got it right here. If a law is unjust, a man is not only right to disobey it, he is obligated to do so. So there it is. Yeah, it's our moral duty. It's our obligation to disobey unjust laws. Now that I've shared stuff like that before, and I'm sure people think that's kind of extreme. But I think perfect. Even to suggest something like that, you'd have policemen in riot gear coming at you and stuff. It's a pretty big deal when you contest unfair laws. But I think in the case of Rosa Parks, I mean I think she's a perfect example of what Thomas Jefferson tried to express, disobeying an unjust law, by merely sitting down in the section of the bus that was designated just for white people. She brought a lot of attention to herself, a lot of press, and was able to, because of her actions, had a large part in being able to, change those laws and revocate, Jim Crow laws, and start that civil rights movement. So pretty amazing woman, and kind of demonstrated to us kind of the embodiment of what Thomas Jefferson taught. I mean, she was a perfect example of that. And how is that talk? And of course, that kind of talk of disobeying laws isn't tolerated today. But to not act on Thomas Jefferson's advice, to me, it feels like it would be just an unchallenged slip into, New World Order, complete government control takeover, and absolute tyranny. So, this is how we fight for our freedom. But yeah, I wish to, I guess now, kind of compare and contrast other unlawful measures, laws that have been passed in the past, that have impressed entire ethnic groups and brought about ethnic genocide and stuff like that. And the first one being the woman. I want to talk about first and foremost the woman, because men are experiencing now, what women did back in the 1800s. It's come back full circle. You could say it's karma coming back to kick us in the ass, for being so thoughtless of women back then. But back then in the 1800s, the Victorian period, the women they couldn't vote, they had no property, weren't allowed to own property, and marriage was pretty much just a business transaction. To become marriage was, a woman got married and just became, the man's dependent, his personal property, and stuff like that. And if a woman could not, if she ever acquired land while she was married, she couldn't keep that land. She had, when they got separated, the land and the kids went to the husband. She had no rights to the children or land. And on top of that, she oftentimes lose her identity and become just erased in the memory of her kids, of her children and stuff. had to start over from square one. So yeah, it could be said that maybe men deserve the injustices that we get today. So, and and then there's Jim Crow laws, which we've talked about. Just to legalize persecution, lawful persecution of black people. There's the LDS extermination order, the Indian Removal Act, and then the Jewish extermination order, the Holocaust and all that kind of thing. And the question is, did we have a choice as citizens? Did we have a choice? And when it came to legalized persecution and the genocide of other nations, and of course we did. That's what Thomas Jefferson expressed. It's not only our right to disobey unfair evictions, unlawful, unfair laws and stuff. It's our obligation. So let's see, where are we? So but yeah, the next podcast I intend on maybe talking about, make it a little more personal. Talk about some of the divorce laws that are on the books, and how they've enabled, which has been just a repeat of what happened to women. I think in the the Victorian era and stuff like that, and show. And talk about those things. And it was 1848 that there was a women's convention. What they call that? I can't think of the name now. But yeah, there was a women's convention in 1848. They pretty much replicated the signing of the Declaration of Independence. They started their declaration with we hold these truths to be self-evident that. We hold these truths to be self-evident that all men and women are created equal. That's not found in the original Constitution. In the original Constitution, it just says men. And they made a list of all their grievances. The fact that they couldn't hold land or property. Their grievances with men, that they were men's personal property. That they didn't have the right to vote, and so forth. So they were right there in the thick of. The black men, trying to they were marched alongside the black men trying to, get the right to vote. They passed the 15th Amendment in, what was it, 1870? Yeah, 1870. They passed the 15th Amendment, which gave the black men the right to vote, but the woman was not included in that. It wasn't until 70 years later in 1920 that they passed the 19th Amendment, where women could then vote. So yeah, I'm sure that was probably, can't imagine how women felt to see the black men were able to get the right to vote, but they weren't able to get theirs for 70 years later. So let's see, where were we? But yeah, many feared, in 1848, many feared, when you saw the start of the suffrage movement, many men feared that they didn't want to see women get the right to vote, just because they said it would undermine society, and in light of what's going on today, you kind of wonder if that might be true, with Nazi feminist movements and their radical agendas, to oppress men and stuff like that. It makes men almost want to, run and hide and wish for death. So, and of course, they may feel as though they're justified. They may be rightly justified in making laws that are just really meant for nothing more than just retribution and stuff like that. But the answer will always be, the natural approach, which is natural law. And of course, that would involve people having to have empathy and compassion to want to get on board with that. So, but the founders taught. Let's see. The founders taught that we all exhibit God's divinity and the ability to discern what's fair and what's not, and to be able to determine how God's law should be reflected in laws, whether it's national law or state law. And this is evidence with Rosa Parks, you guys. She didn't feel inclined to have to submit to man's laws. She recognized the fallacy of it and went out of her way to help change those laws, knowing that it makes you wonder if she knew that she had that spark of divinity in her, that she represented God's will on earth instead of man's will. But yeah, in closing, I just want to say it's my wish to encourage, I guess, you to recognize that we all have that spark of divinity with us to challenge laws. By all of us teaching this, and by teaching this, by making people familiar with it, maybe we can hope for a future where we don't have to face so much resistance just to be able to challenge unfair laws. Yeah, with police and be met with police and riot gear, place us in prison and stuff like that. For merely trying to challenge unfair laws. That's the precedent that the founding fathers set in place for us. So anyways, I hope you all have a wonderful day, and don't forget, viva la resistance. Have a good one. We'll see ya.